Oh my God.
Tombstone wasn't just a classic Western. It was one of the greatest stories ever told. From a crazy, trigger-happy dentist to a sheriff who hated his job, and the ultimate Vendetta ride that actually changed the course of history. These are 22 weird facts you didn't know about Tombstone. And as a bonus, I'll tell you exactly how the real Wyatt Earp died. So, sit back and let's rewind time. Number 1. No one can imagine anyone other than Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer playing the roles of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. Yet the two stars were never the first choice for the roles. In fact, the roles were first offered to Kevin Costner and Willem Dafoe. Costner declined, choosing to star in his own version of the film Wyatt Earp just a year later, which left the studio scrambling for a main character. Jeff Bridges would later be offered the role, also declining to star in The Big Lebowski, which sparked Kurt Russell into accepting it after being recommended by Bridges. As for Kilmer, he only accepted the role when he learned that Costner was not going to star in it, so as not to compete with his great friend. But you won't believe how hard Kilmer worked to nail the role of Doc Holliday. Number 2. Before filming started, Kilmer was not as skilled at operating a gun. However, Doc Holliday is historically known for being one of the fastest guns in the West, possibly only rivaled by Billy the Kid and Jesse James. To ensure that fans see someone who is just as skilled as Doc Holliday was said to be, Kilmer enlisted trainers who helped him work on his draw. The actor spent many hours every day focusing on his drawing to ensure that he had the speed to match. This all came to fruition in one of the final scenes, where Doc Holliday faked the severity of his own illness to kill Ringo. It paid off, creating a cinematic moment that felt real, and he even topped it off with the arrogance of Doc Holliday. But this isn't even close to the work put in by the screenwriter. Number 3. One of the biggest challenges with true stories is nailing the accuracy of the setting. This isn't something that can be done from a studio in Hollywood, so screenwriter Kevin Jarre actually moved to Tombstone. But Jarre didn't just sit in the town to write the script. He actually visited every historic place, spoke to some of the locals, and took in the atmosphere. Once he understood Tombstone, he enrolled in cowboy camp where he learned the ropes, being taught horse riding, using a six-shooter, and many other skills that truly transformed him into a cowboy. It all paid off massively, creating one of the greatest ever depictions of the life of Wyatt Earp and how everything played out, especially the scene at the OK Corral. But you won't believe what happened to Jarre. Number 4. When filming began, Jarre was the main man directing the story. Yet after about a month of shooting, the screenwriter-turned-director got significantly overwhelmed by the demands of the film, especially the logistical issues. So, he was fired, leaving the production without a director. The studio quickly turned to George P. Cosmatos to fill the role, and he created a classic, but not without a few hiccups of his own. Cast members complained about how he treated the extras like crap, with Michael Biehn even shouting at the director. He later claimed that it was Kurt Russell who held it all together and ensured that everything was still accurate. But did you know you can visit the setting for one of the scenes? Number 5. The shooting at the OK Corral wasn't just made up. It was one of the most famous gun sites of the late 19th century. Located in the town of Tombstone, which has now become a hub for tourists looking to experience the Western culture, anyone can actually visit the real site. Town locals have gone so far in making tours available for fans, with cutouts placed to show exactly where the shooting took place and where every person was supposedly standing. Even some of the old saloons are still working, serving meals that might be a little more modern, but will definitely give you a taste of what life was like in the Old West. And if the OK Corral is not what you want to visit, there are Boot Hill Graveyard and the Birdcage Theater, where you can get a taste of what it was like to be entertained in the 1880s. So, if you're a fan of the American West, a trip to Tombstone should be something on your bucket list. Number 6. Sam Elliott has, for decades, been one of the best actors when it comes to creating westerns. He famously has a stunning soup strainer mustache, which certainly helped to create the real Wild West feeling. But this mustache has a connection to the real Wyatt Earp, believe it or not. In fact, Sam Elliott is a relative to the grandson of William Earp, a man also named William. But even growing it wasn't enough to get it to fully pop on screen. The team's makeup department used black mascara to enhance the prodigious mustache. But it is still fascinating that it came from the same lineage, and certainly brought some character to Virgil Earp. But this film isn't just another Hollywood fantasy. Number 7. While many other westerns of the time were considered fictional and dominated by stars such as Clint Eastwood, Tombstone follows the real life of former Marshal Wyatt Earp. The film accurately portrayed how the former Marshal set out west to retire and live a calmer life, instead of chasing bandits and criminals of the time. Yet, this was never the reality when a group of bandits, known as the Cowboys, set out to draw Wyatt Earp back into the role of sheriff. They succeeded after the death of his brother, portraying most of the moments in the exact same way that it happened, even though some of them might have been a little different than actually depicted. But even the new director brought in had an affinity for the Wild West that might have been even bigger than that of Kevin Jarre. Number 8. When George Cosmatos first saw the 1957 Burt Lancaster film Gunfight at the OK, he became obsessed with the characters and story. In fact, he always yearned to create something that would accurately depict the real gunfight. To pull this off, the filming took place at the exact same location where, more than 100 years earlier, the events unfolded. Cosmos, as he was later known, even wanted the characters to stand in the same position and say the same lines that were supposedly used before the gunfight. It took a lot of work and rehearsals, but it would immortalize one of the greatest gunfights in the West. And as Cosmatos said, the film isn't just another Western, but a classic Greek tragedy played out in the American frontier. Number 9. When Kilmer was first given the role of the eccentric Doc Holliday, he became obsessed with the character. Even though the real Doc Holliday was never known for his piano skills, Kilmer was surprisingly good at it. In fact, he actually practiced the piano extensively to enhance Doc's eccentricities, specifically learning Chopin's Nocturne in E minor, specifically for his role as Doc Holliday. So even though it might sound like an extra was brought in to play the piano, or many even speculate that Kilmer might have faked his piece on the piano, you can be pretty certain that he could play the piano in real life. But if Kilmer put in so much work for the role, you would even imagine the work put in by the lead actor Kurt Russell. Number 10. Kurt Russell has never been one to half-ass his way through a role. In fact, he went to great lengths to understand Old Western firearms and use them with complete authenticity. To perfect the role of Wyatt Earp, Russell underwent extensive training to master the classic single-action revolvers used in the film. But he wasn't alone. Russell enlisted the help of legendary Hollywood gun coach Thel Reed, who taught him the ropes of speed loading, fanning hammers, and drawing. This ensured that while he was on screen, Wyatt Earp really felt as good and quick as he is described in history. It is easy to see why the movie felt so realistic, with Kurt Russell embodying the real-life confidence of his training to fire a gun in the exact same manner as was originally intended. Number 11. Now, the crew could have easily pulled up to Hollywood to try and recreate the film, but the director himself wanted authenticity. However, doing so might seem almost impossible with the way Tombstone has evolved into a tourist hub. So, to match the historic accuracy of the script, the crew booked the set. They went through hundreds of old photographs, looking at where things were and trying to set them up in the exact way, up to the finest detail. Production designer Catherine Hardwick and her team painstakingly created a true replica, with over 65 structures on the 12-acre lot at the Mescal movie set in Benson, Arizona. Many of the actors even said that walking on set was literally like stepping back in time to the real Tombstone of 1881. And for audiences back home, it felt like they were living in the same era as the real Wyatt Earp. Again, showing the lengths everyone went to ensure that it was as historically accurate as humanly possible. This explains why it cost the studio nearly $25 million to create the film. Number 12. When watching the film, some attraction is present between Kurt Russell's Wyatt Earp and Dana Delaney's Josephine Marcus. In fact, anyone watching the film could tell you that the story was heading in that direction, yet it magically got lost. Test audiences didn't like the narrative, stating that it distracted them from the central themes of loyalty and vengeance displayed by Wyatt Earp. So the director cut it out. Delaney has said she regrets how much was cut, but ultimately, the film is more streamlined and hard-hitting without this passionate romance subplot. It was the right call, no doubt. But in real life, Wyatt Earp and Josephine Marcus did marry after the events of the movie, choosing to tie the knot on a yacht off the coast of California in 1890. She'd go on to outlive Wyatt, passing away at the age of 83 in 1944. But modern audiences didn't understand the cruelty of life back in the Wild West, and would be shocked by some of the lines. Number 13. Back in the 1990s, the world wasn't yet as desensitized to violence as it is today. So when Curly Bill Brocious boasted about skinning Mexicans, viewers were actually shocked. with the mere act being seen as extremely controversial at the time. Today, such a scene wouldn't have any real impact, but it just shows how Tombstone was pushing every single boundary it possibly could. It all flowed perfectly to give viewers an idea of the brutality and harsh reality of living on the frontier. Number 14. Now, I cannot stress enough how much effort went into creating the film, with everyone, including the actors, being forced to undergo boot camp. Yes, Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer had a lot of work put into ensuring their characters were authentic, but so did the rest of the cast. Each relevant actor was sent to old Tucson studios, where they underwent boot camp to teach them everything about horseback riding, stagecoach driving, and even the relevant gun skills needed to pull off such an accurate depiction. It is perhaps this extra level of effort that gave it a feeling of historical authenticity and brought the film to life. Number 15.
Not me. I'm in my prime.
Yeah, you look it.
One of the props that carried through the entire film is the cup and saucer used by Doc Holliday. But it wasn't just another random prop brought for the film. In fact, anyone visiting Tombstone can see it displayed in the Crystal Palace Saloon. As it turns out, that specific cup and saucer actually belonged to the real Doc Holliday and was an antique set purchased by a private collector and later purchased by the studio to be used for filming. It once again proves the lengths the studio and director went to ensure they could capture the real feeling of the 1880s. Number 16. No one can imagine anyone other than Sam Elliott playing the role of Virgil Earp, but getting him to portray the role was a challenge. In fact, Elliott didn't even want to play the role, having been semi-retired for 5 years. But when the director contacted him and sent him the script, he was eager to star in the role, stating that he knew if Kurt Russell was playing Wyatt, it would lead to a lot of laughs and gags on set. This confirms that many of the cast, including Val Kilmer, were all great friends, which is probably the reason why everyone portrayed their specific roles so well. These actors weren't just brothers on screen, but had a similar relationship when the cameras were turned off. Number 17. One of the most iconic scenes actually happens during the Vendetta ride. During the scene, Wyatt and his crew surprise Curly Bill at a campfire, where all hell breaks loose. Yet, this wasn't the true story of how Curly Bill met his end. But the scene wasn't just a fantasy. It was actually based on a real event from the Old West. In fact, the screenwriter based it on John Selman's ambush and murder of notorious outlaw John Wesley Hardin in El Paso, Texas. The hard and fast impact that led to the brutality of the scene was impactful in showing the level of hatred and vengeance Wyatt had for Curly Bill, who was part of the crew that murdered his brother. At least it wasn't some kind of fantasy. Number 18. When the film was first released, it got some mixed reviews, with hardcore Western fans praising it, while many critics suggested that it didn't accurately portray the vengeance undertaken by Wyatt Earp. Many believe that going from lawman to stereotypical gunslinger was factually incorrect. Yet modern audiences found it far more entertaining than various other editions of the film that had been released since. In fact, it strikes the perfect balance between real history and a little bit of Hollywood, while still bringing the authenticity of the Old West. And you wouldn't believe how they aged the actors. Number 19. One of the biggest differences between modern society and the Old West is the harsh conditions that people had to endure. It aged people significantly faster, and even though someone was in their 30s, it wasn't uncommon to see them look closer to 50. To convincingly play frontiersmen who survived the harsh elements of the West, the principal cast had to look appropriately grizzled and weathered. So they brought in a doctor, who worked hand-in-hand with makeup effects specialist Jill Rockow to help age the actors. Medical prosthetics were brought in for burn victims, while dermatological products were used to create the creased and leathery skin of the actors. This gave them that natural, rough, and tough look of people who had suffered through hard times, scrapping for every cent they could find. Number 20. One of the main reasons why people know about the OK Corral wasn't because a historian dug up some information about it. In fact, the real Wyatt Earp moved to Hollywood following his expeditions on the frontier, where he had the idea of telling tales about his life to anyone who'd listen. In fact, he began working as a consultant on many films from 1915, enabling them to create the authentic scenes of what life was truly like. It is even reported that John Wayne, one of the most famous cowboy actors of all time, based his walk on the way Wyatt Earp used to walk. These tidbits of information were passed down for generations before making it into the hit film Tombstone. But how did the real Wyatt Earp die? Number 21. Following the stories of Tombstone, Wyatt eventually made his way to Hollywood. He spent a lot of time there, telling his stories and helping many actors. Yet, the man himself was rapidly aging, and in 1929, he began suffering from chronic cystitis. This form of urinary tract infection eventually spread, and the former lawman passed away in a rented bungalow in California. Many Western actors of the time attended his funeral, including pallbearers at the time of his death. Number 22. One of the reasons for the accurate portrayal by Kurt Russell was the fact that he had access to a lot of the written notes and stories from the real Wyatt Earp. But this wasn't passed to him through Sam Elliott. In fact, Wyatt Earp III was actually one of the actors, portraying the role of Billy Claiborne. He shared some of his historic notes and stories that were passed through generations to help Russell make the character as authentic as he possibly could. That's 22 facts about Tombstone. But there is one more bonus fact you need to know. Bonus fact: the death of Doc Holliday. Throughout the film, everyone can see and feel that Doc Holliday isn't well. In fact, he was suffering from severe tuberculosis, while his lifestyle of drinking, gambling, and smoking didn't really do much to contribute to his condition. Despite the portrayal of Doc moving to a facility before his passing, he actually did try to remedy his situation by visiting Glenwood Springs, Colorado, hoping that the curative powers of the waters might help him restore his lungs. But it didn't. In fact, it did more damage to his lungs than initially expected. And as he lay there dying, with only a nurse by his side, he famously asked for a glass of whiskey. When the nurse denied his request, Doc looked at his bootless feet, amused. His final words were,
"This is funny."
Now, despite the historical significance of the film, it still had a bit of Hollywood flair to it, almost as much as Jennifer Aniston in the boredom-filled Office Space, which was released just a couple of years later. If you want to find out how crazy that was, check out this video next.